Tonight we're going to go back 50 some odd years. We're going to talk about Lieutenant J.G. Art Doherty here. He's a lot better looking back then than he is now. Oh yeah, it gets worse, Art, don't it? Art Doherty and his gunner Jack, and I don't know, is it Berliner?
Berliner.
Art Doherty and his gunner Jack Berliner had a big decision to make. They were bobbing in a raft before dawn in the Philippine Sea in 1944. Several hours after their U.S. dive bomber, a hell diver, had crashed and made an emergency landing in the ocean. They heard a big ship nearby. It was dark, no running lights. Right, Paul? No running lights at night. They signaled with a flashlight, and the destroyer turned. It seemed that it was coming from the right direction, but what if it was Japanese? Quote, "We talked it over and decided to shoot it out if it was an enemy ship. We knew that they'd really be ticked off because our bombers had just blasted the hell out of them. We didn't expect to be treated well." As the hulking ship loomed over the small raft, the brazen Doherty challenged the ship with a loud voice. "Identify yourself." And back came a response, "What the hell difference does it make to you?" But it was in English. And I'm quoting Art here. "I knew we were in good hands, then the two pistols and the Boy Scout knife really weren't much defense." The time, June 19th, 20th, 1944. The location, the Philippine Sea. This is an original, this is an overhead made from his ship's cruise book. The players, let's first talk about the Japanese. The pride of the Japanese fleet in 1943 and 44 consisted of carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and escorts. It was called the first mobile fleet. The carriers were the backbone and were reorganized for the defense of the Central Pacific in the summer of 1944. The Japanese had more carriers, but were actually weaker in aircraft. Come on in. No problem. You'll have to, you bet. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You'll have to stay after class for being late. You bet. The Japanese had more carriers, but were weaker in aircraft than at the start of Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor, they had 450 aircraft in action, and now in the Philippine Sea they had 432. But they had some carriers, and they had some big ones. Help me out with these names here, Art. The Chuyo, which had 27 planes. The Inyo, who had 27 planes. The Chaitos and Chayota, they were converted seaplane carriers. They each had 30 planes. The Kayo, 24 planes. The Shinyo, 30 planes. And there were some hybrids. They called them hybrids. They were battleships that were converted to carriers. They had learned the lesson. They saw, as we talked about in other classes, one airplane, one pilot could put an entire battleship out of action. We realized it, the Japanese realized it, so they took some of their battleships and removed their 14-inch guns off the fantails, back of the ships, put carrier decks on them. And they launched out they were shortened carrier decks, and they launched out seaplanes that were bombers. The aircraft of the Japanese Navy. Mitsubishi Zero SEN, the mainstay of the Japanese Navy, a good, hard fighting aircraft, dominated the war in the earlier years of the Pacific War. I was going for a dive bomb there. The Mitsubishi A5M4 Claude. I don't know where they got these names. Claude must have been an American slang, obviously. Right here. Yeah, landing gear that didn't come up, but these are pretty heavy planes. And then the Nakajima B5N2 Kate. A lot of those in there. A lot of those in the Navy, in the Japanese Navy. And then I got, just to show you an idea of what they look like. I thought that was a Mustang when I first saw it, a P-51. I got that turned around, don't I? Let's see. Yokosuka D-4Y, called a Judy. Dive bomber, reconnaissance, crew of 2, 8,200 pounds, 350 miles an hour, 7.9 millimeter machine guns. And the pilots of the Japanese Navy, they were young, they were courageous, but at this time in the Pacific War they were poorly trained. They were training pilots within weeks instead of months. Japan was beginning to see the attrition in their Navy pilots. The U.S. aircraft, the aircraft that Art was in, and the fighters, Corsairs, we're going to throw those up here, they were dominating the skies. Pilots were well-trained, seasoned veterans, and they were out to hunt. They were aggressive. We were in an aggressive, offensive mode at this time. Now, who did the U.S. bring to the party? The U.S. Fifth Fleet and the combat-tested Task Force 58. Over 900 aircraft, with another Task Force 51 and 12 escort carriers operating over 300 more aircraft. U.S. carriers had improved communications and control systems, longer range radars, crisper radio links to avoid the fumbling and confusion that was so prevalent in 1942. In short, the U.S. Fifth Fleet was poised to give the Japanese Navy its first object lesson in how overwhelming naval strength with carrier versatility as its cutting edge should be used. And the big carriers were there too. The USS Enterprise, the USS Bellawood and Bataan, the USS Yorktown. Dozens of so escort carriers. Let's see, did I leave anybody out? Oh, the Hornet, the USS Hornet, Lieutenant Doherty's home. And the aircraft of Task Force 58. I get this right. Here's an aircraft that everybody loves. F-4U-1A Corsair, fighter bomber. I carried a bomb.
External
Yeah.
liquid, yeah.
Yeah, but their mission was fighters, right?
Basically was fighting.
Yeah, fighters. Load weight 14,000 pounds, maximum speed almost 400 miles an hour, range 1,000 miles, armament 6 50-inch machine guns, 6 of them. Mike?
This is an aircraft used extensively by the Marines in developing air-ground coordination for ground support. That was really the cutting edge, more to it in the South Pacific, more so than even in the European theater. And this aircraft was used quite a bit for ground support.
Yeah. One of the reasons for that was that the Corsair coming aboard the carrier, as they come around here, you'll notice the nacelle or the motor part is huge. The SB2C is back, but they could not see the landing signal officer, and when they pulled the nose up and put it like that, it would
Dump out.
and so at the time when I was out there, the Corsair was actually used like when we would hit an island and it would be secured, then the Marine groups, air groups, would then come, they'd be launched from a Jeep carrier over to that island, and then they would work from that island basically to secure any other islands or things such as that. But during this stage of the war, they could not get this plane from not spinning in just before they got the cut
To get on the carrier.
aboard. And
When did this aircraft come into the arsenal?
43 or 44.
Late, a little bit middle of the war, late to the war. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is the hot dog. This is the sports car of the fighters. This is the
It's a nice airplane.
nice airplane. You bet. Let's take a look at this Grumman F6F. I think there's 2 of them on here.
Yeah, that's a TBM.
Don't correct me, Art. That first one is, they call it an F6F Hellcat.
Yeah.
Fighter, loaded weight. This also had 6 50 caliber machine guns on it. Just amazes me they carry that many in a bomb. This is a torpedo bomber, correct?
TBM.
yeah. TBF crew of 3. So I guess they had a pilot,
A gunner, radioman.
radioman, and a gunner. Now,
Down on the stern, right down by the tail.
oh, there's a gun down here too. Yeah, I didn't see that. And this is a gun here?
I don't know.
Yeah. 3 on there, and its range was a little over 1,000 miles.
Very reliable. Very reliable.
Not a pretty aircraft,
Well,
but a
no.
workhorse. Yeah,
The
Mike.
other thing about those TBMs, if you lived back here in '59, that time frame here in Missoula, you saw those out at the airport. Those were some of the original Doherty bombers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they brought a bunch of.
Wow. Now, this is as close as I could get to an overhead of Art's Chariot,
Oh, no.
but he'll correct us there. This was, what is this, the first generation it changed? This is an SB2, which there are some pictures.
Dive bomber.
Yeah, this, yeah.
It had an exterior bomb. You could see the bomb cradle underneath there. The bomb was an external bomb, and I think it was only a 500 pound. It could have been a 750 or something. And that plane was used during the Battle of Midway, and when Guadalcanal was first hit, and during that, as a matter of fact, we came out from Alameda Naval Air Station on the Hornet, and we had SB-2Cs, which you'll show later. No, we had the SBDs on there.
And then
we
went
got
to-
the Hilo,
Yeah.
or Fort Island.
Okay.
Here were all these SB-2Cs waiting for us.
Yeah.
So we went from that to the next and much bigger aircraft that carried the bomb.
This is a
Douglas Skywalker.
two
Two-seater.
two-seaters. Now the one that Art has a gunner, right? Has a gunner, has gunner turret, and there's a picture of it over there. The big picture. Yeah, Chief, go ahead and roll that out. Just undo it there. Because Art keeps correcting me. He's hung up on this point. I don't know why. And we talk about this stuff, and he says, don't mess up. He doesn't want me to put him in that aircraft.
Well, no, it was a good aircraft. It done its job in Battle of Midway and everything else. But
Like,
it
is there a
didn't
big
work
difference? Come on.
Big enough Lloyd.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Actually, the Douglas dive bomber was a much better airplane than the Curtiss dive bomber. That was,
They were made by 2 different people then?
oh yeah.
Okay. Okay, now let's talk about the pilots a little bit, about Task Force 58. They were young, as were the Japanese, and they were courageous, as with the Japanese. But they were better trained. There was more of them, and more of them coming online all the time. They also had better aircraft. Okay, we've talked about the time, we've talked about the place, we've looked at the players. Now let's sit back, and let's go back to the Battle of the Philippine Sea. June 19th, 1944. This isn't Art. This is Admiral Clark. Or Michener. This is Clark.
Yeah.
At first light, Admiral Michener ordered Admiral Clark aboard the USS Hornet to launch a special 325-mile search to the southwest, which Clark did with negative results. The USS Hornet was on the eastern end of Task Force 58. And at daylight, Admiral Clark could actually see Guam on the horizon. At 0619, Spruance, these are all names that you hear in Navy history, ordered all carrier task groups to change course westward in a general direction of the Japanese fleet. At 0900, the communications officer intercepted a corrected contact report from a PBM Mariner search plane. Is that like a PBY? Is that a float plane?
Very much so. Only it was it didn't have, it wasn't, well, yeah, it was a full plane.
Was it?
So,
I couldn't ever find a picture of one. The report pinpointed the Japanese fleet 360 miles away, but still beyond the range of our aircraft. Clark relayed the message to Michener, who sent it on to Spruance. At 0937, the other task group combat intelligence officers began to pick up aircraft on their radars 130 miles to the westward. Michener recalled all his fighters from Guam to defend the carriers, ordering all dive bombers and torpedo planes to take off and orbit east of Guam. This is the Marianas Turkey Shoot, so you weren't there. Okay, I got it.
I was there.
Yeah, I mean, you weren't there in this one.
Okay.
Yeah. At 10.
But I was.
But that cane looks thing there. At 1000 hours, general quarters was sounded and all hands in the task force went to their battle stations. Meanwhile, 450 Hellcats and a few night F-4U Corsairs took off to intercept the attacking Japanese. The melee that followed was aptly described by one pilot as the Marianas Turkey Shoot. Our pilots and planes were so superior to those of the Japanese that only a handful of enemy planes reached our ships, and these were properly shot down by anti-aircraft fire. Throughout the day, the Japanese repeatedly tried to launch air strikes against our ships, but each time our pilots shot down the enemy. Reports of the battle were impressive. Clark's pilots claimed 109 enemy planes shot down, while the total for Task Force 58 turned out to be 385. It was the greatest aerial victory in the Pacific War. 40 Hellcats were lost, but many of the pilots were rescued. The Japanese lost about 11 aviators to every one of the Americans, a ratio that was to continue throughout the war, 1 to 11. Task Force 58 steamed west at 23 knots during the night, June 20th, 1944. The quiet Sunday afternoon at sea was suddenly broken at 15:40. That's 3:40 in the afternoon for you Army guys. By excited chatter over the radio. The Japanese fleet had again been sighted 275 miles due west of Saipan, steaming northwest at 20 knots. 8 minutes later, Michener told all the task force groups around him to report to him any radio messages that they heard. At 15:53, he gave the word, "Expect to launch everything we have. Probably have to recover at night." The pilots, who had been in their ready room since dawn, now copied down the latest target information from the ticker tape screens on to their navigational charts. Michener gave them one parting thought. The primary mission, get the carriers. At 16:10, the pilots manned their planes. Lieutenant J.G. Doherty was one of those pilots. And at 16:21, they turned to the wind and executed a record 10-minute launch. The flight consisted of 216 planes, 85 Hellcat fighters, 54 Avengers, torpedo bombers, 51 SB-2C Helldivers, dive bombers that had our guest in one of them, and 26 SBD Dauntlesses. Now things started to get interesting for our pilots. No sooner was the strike on its way off the carrier than the search plane sent back a corrected position report placing the Japanese fleet 60 miles further than originally reported. That meant that our planes would have to fly 335 miles to the target, attack the enemy fleet before dark, and fly back to the carriers at dark. The trip and the attack would amount to over 700 miles of flying. God, you must have had a sore butt by the end of that thing, huh?
Well,
The trip and the attack would amount to over 700 miles of flying. Those pilots that fueled last, soon the planes would surely have to land in the water at night. Surely they would have to land in the water at night as they came back. Got me all flustered, Art.
sorry about
That's okay. Those pilots who fueled last could be landed aboard, but unfortunately none of them had qualified for night carrier landings, which is not true. Art will correct me on that. He said they were well trained on that. This is from a book, Eyewitness to Combat. Around 1900, 7 o'clock, Paul, as a half-hour air attack on Japanese warship was ending in the approaching darkness, the fleet began to get reports about the returning planes. Anti-aircraft fire was thick, and battleships and cruisers in desperation, Japanese battleships and cruisers in desperation, even fired their big guns at the American airplanes, 16 and 18-inch guns. About 75 Japanese fighters took off from the carriers, and our Hellcats immediately attacked them. By Japanese records, only 10 of their aircraft survived. Racing against the sudden tropical darkness, our pilots executed hastily coordinated attacks on the flaming ship. The result, one confirmed carrier, the Hayo, was sunk. Pitch black darkness had already descended as the running lights of the first returning airplane was seen over the horizon. With understandable anxiety, Admiral Clark made a drastic, famous decision. He ordered all the ships in the fleet to turn on their lights. This was taking a huge chance that no enemy submarine was lurking nearby. To identify the Hornet from the other ships, Clark informed Michener. Clark ordered an additional vertical searchlight to be shot straight up from the Hornet. Clark informed Michener of his action, and at once Michener promptly signified his approval by ordering all his ships to shoot a vertical thing up. So there was a little bit of confusion. This was indeed one of the war's supreme moments. A multitude of ships emblazed in the sky for many miles, a calculated risk to provide greater safety for the return of battle-worn airmen. Flown by Commander Bill Dean, skipper of the Fighting Twos Arts Group, the first Hellcat landed aboard the Hornet. He was on the first Hellcat that landed aboard the Hornet. Dean rushed up to the bridge to report the results of the attack and expressed great fear that he was going to lose many of his fine pilots to the recovery operation. Recovery of the returning planes was a wild scramble as the exhausted pilots rushed to get aboard any ship they could before their fuel gave out. They were ordered to land on any deck they could find. Many planes landed in the water, but destroyers picked up the pilots and crews, several of them. Everyone concentrated on the rescue operation. Task Force 58 steamed over the path of the returning aircraft and even picked up more of the downed pilots. The first count of the task force's losses, American losses, on June 19th and 20th were 100 airplanes down, 16 pilots lost, 33 air crewmen lost, and due to deck crashes, 2 ship's officers and 4 enlisted lost. Post-war investigation revealed that Japan, in contrast, lost 3 carriers, including 2 sunk by submarines on June 19th, and 445 aircraft, including 12 catapult planes from battleships that were launched, and battleships and cruisers, along with about 50 land-based planes that were launched from Guam. The Japanese fleet still had aircraft carriers left, but by Japanese calculations, only about 10 planes per carrier. The 2-day engagement was fought west of Guam in the direction of the Philippine Islands. The battle became known as the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The first day, the Marianas Turkey Shoot, we broke the backbone of the Japanese carrier aircraft and their carrier strength navy. The second day, we inflicted damage on 17 of their ships, including the sinking of the Hayo. Because it was Michener's one and only opportunity to strike the Japanese, it was called Michener's Sunday Punch. This Pacific victory proved critical. U.S. losses were heavy during the battle of June 19th through the 20th, 1944. But victory was major success in the American Pacific campaign. Of the 14 Hell Diver crews who had taken off from the USS Hornet, only 5 re-landed on the carrier decks. 1 was shot down, and 8, including 1 piloted by Art, were pulled from the water by destroyers. Over 50 years ago, Art Doherty and his fellow flyers went on the counterattack. crippling the Japanese carriers involved in the Pearl Harbor attack. Although the Japanese lost 3 aircraft carriers, some 480 planes, and the bulk of its trained pilots during the 2-day battle, victory also allowed the Americans to capture the 3 largest Marianas Islands and move closer to victory in the Pacific. That was the end of the Battle of the Philippine Sea.
Oh.
Before I'd like to thank, of course, Art, who's going to quiz him here, and he's a little bit nervous, but we told him we'd be kind to him here today. Art, I'd like to present you with one of Stan Cohen's books. Stan's a publisher here in town.
Yeah.
This is Montana on the home front. You guys, this is books available at all the good bookstores here in Missoula. Put that on film.
Thank you very much.
You bet,
Thank you,
bet,
very much.
You bet.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Art Doherty. Several years ago, like over 50-some, he was flying airplanes off the USS Hornet. And once again, Art, welcome.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's see. Actually, I'm a Montana bred and raised dude. I'm born in Geyser, Montana. Anybody know where Geyser is? Oh, it's 50 miles east of Great Falls. When I was a little kid, we moved to Great Falls. I came to Missoula when I was going to school to watch Greg Rice run, and that's when I decided I wanted to go to school at the university. I got 2 years at the university. Originally, when I was 7 years old, I going to school. Lindbergh flew right over the school that I was just going to go in, and he turned by the church and went on, and that's when I said, I'm going to fly. And so when I got my 2 years in, I checked in about the Air Force and this and that, and I decided I'd go back to Washington, D.C. If I was going to get in the Navy, they said that was the toughest exams there. So I went there, and I spent months there going. Seemed like they were in no big hurry. At first they'd have you come out and do this and do that, and physicals, and then you talk to the psychologists and everybody. Anyway, I was on the day that the Japs hit Pearl. Matter of fact, I was shaving in the morning, getting ready to go to church, and I heard it. And a couple guys and I went out to the Japanese embassy, and already there was Marines outside the fence, and this is just a matter of hours. Outside the fence, keeping people back. They were screaming to kill the Japs there, and they were in there burning their damn notes and whatever. And went down the Navy buildings, and of course all the Navy guys were out in the Marines and keeping everybody away. So the next morning I went out to Anacostia Naval Air Station, and man, it was like a different world. They wanted you right now. So it was just a matter of a couple of 3 months that I finished up the physicals and all the red tape that goes with it, and they told me I was accepted and that I was going to go to Seattle to take my pre-flight, and so I went over to Seattle, took my pre-flight there. I then went down to Pensacola. I might add that I was in charge of a sleeper car that went from Seattle to Pensacola. There were 21 of us aboard. I think I was the only guy with 2 years of college. All the other guys were graduates, and every time the train stopped, they peeled off. And my orders said there were 21 people that were turned over to me to report Pensacola with 21, and they knew that, and it was rough. Every time train would stop, they'd get off and run to go in a store anything just to give me a bad time. And we got down Pensacola, and it was about 11 o'clock at night. I called up the NAS there, and I said, Cadet Doherty reporting 21 people from Seattle. And they said yes, and I said, are we to go get hotel rooms, and then you pick us up in the morning? And right then I learned how they swear in the Navy. Right away is said, don't you move, we'll send transportation into town for us. So we waited a little while, and of course I had to tell these guys, and they were all mad at me. And here come this cattle truck, and you get in the side and get in there, and man, it was cold. And that was about 10, 12, 14 miles out there. And reported in the officer of the day, and then we went and got our quarters. Well, I was at Pensacola. They have about 7 or 8 different outlying fields for your different stages, and the main station was for instruments. And anyway, we graduated, most of us graduated, and went down to Opelika Naval Air Station, where we learned overwater navigation. And they'd put 2 ensigns in one plane and figured we shouldn't get lost. And then after that, we went up to Chicago, to Glendale on NAS, and they had a converted tanker, or one of those ships with they build a flat deck on it. And so we went out there, and we went out about 3 different times, and the weather was so bad that we had to go back. But anyway, we finally got our 9. I think there's 1 or 2 guys that couldn't land aboard, and so of course they washed them out. But we got our landings, and then from there went to Norfolk, and then over to Cape May, New Jersey, where our air group was formed. And the dive bombers were there, and then the torpedo bombers were another little town that had a little strip, and the fighters were also at a separate place. From there, we went on up to Quonset Point in Rhode Island, and we flew from 2 in the afternoon till 2 in the morning, and that's where we got our night carrier qualification. So old Jocko Clark, as well as I know him, he said that we're not night qualified, but our air group was. I don't know about the others, but we were night qualified. Just thought I'd bring that in. Incidentally, I'll tell you my only big run-in with Jocko Clark. He was from Texas, and he was part Apache or something. He had a big bottom lip, and he'd lean over and watch things going along on the flight deck. And then after about the 2nd day of operations, he'd have all this goop on his lower lip because he got a sunburn. But anyway, no, it doesn't say that, I don't think. But actually, he was a pretty nice guy. One day, my plane got shot up, and I lost my hydraulics, which on a Curtiss dive bomber, your electricity, your electrical wiring and your hydraulics go out. So my flaps would not come down. You have to slow the plane down. You got to have your flaps, just like those today. And my hook, oh, I got a good use for this. The hook is when you push the plunger, well then it comes down like this to catch the wire. And as it scrapes along, catches the wire and stops you. Well, it only came out to about like yay. And so I waited till everybody else landed, and then I came around, like this was the flight deck, and I came around. When you get about here, you wiggle your wings vigorously so the LSO, your landing signal officer, will know, bring me aboard if at all possible. So I wiggled, and then I came in. Now on that plane, you had to come in kind of a skid, because there was so much nacelle, if you're going straight at him, you couldn't see the landing signal officer, so you had to be in a side slip kind of, and then when you get around, you kick the rudder, and then you land aboard. Well, anyway, I come roaring in, and I tried to ease it down to that hook to catch, but it didn't, so I slammed into the barrier, and I'm sure you've seen that on the Fighting Lady. Well, anyway, come slamming in there, and of course the motor stops and everybody runs up, and that cable is about yay thick. And Asbestos Joe, he's the guy with the asbestos suit, he's the first one up on the wing in case you're in there, and fires start real easy when you hit the barrier. And so I was all right, so he jumped off, and then my plane captain, the guy that fixed that 20 millimeter shell, jumped up on the wing, and I says, I'm okay. I says, they're going to throw this thing over the side, so get that clock out of there. I want something to remember this by. So they pushed it over the side on number 2 elevator, and he got it before they pushed it over, so that's why I got that. So, well, I got down in the ready room, and we were talking about it, and here comes this Marine. He salutes somebody, and he said, the Admiral requests the presence of the pilot that hit the barrier. So everybody looks around at you, you know. Oh, that's a funny feeling. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to talk to him. So I don't know what I did, whether I washed no, I didn't wash my face. I just followed him up there in my flight jacket, or flight suit. And we got up there, we got in his quarter. He has a one deck up there, and he's running around, and they're all running around up there. Anyway, and he says, well, I salute, and I say, Lieutenant Doherty reporting as requested. He said, why? What are you doing here? What are you requesting it about? I says, well, I don't know, sir. This Marine told me to report. And then somebody says, well, he hit the barrier, and you told me to find out what the hell was going on. So I called him to come up. He says, oh, and then he patted me on the, good landing. Are you okay? You're okay? Good. And then he patted me once more, and he turned around, and I saluted. So that was my deal with old Jocko. But to get a little more serious, our air group started out at the first place I think we hit was Waukde or someplace like that. And of course, needless to say, everybody was scared to death, and they probably had 3 BB guns down there, but we were still scared. And we came back, and then we started up the Waukde. Where is that little turkey? What was it? Oh, no. Well, anyway, they didn't have hardly anything there. And but it was a good place to get baptized, I guess you might say. And then we moved on. Now, I was in Task Force 58.1, and that was the lead carrier group. There were 3 carriers in the group. We had 2 big battleships, the Iowa and whatever, and I mean big ones. And then we had some cruisers, and of course about 25 tin cans, destroyers. And then there was 58.1, .2, .3, and .4. And as it turned out, I flew wing on the skipper for a while, the worst navigator in the Navy, And actually, in all these points that we hit, Manila Bay, Philippines, Palau, Yap, Ulithi, Guam, Tinian, Saipan, Pagan, where Iwo Jima, we were on the initial strikes, and which meant that we got up about 2:30 in the morning. There was a Catholic priest aboard from Boston, and he would say Mass for us in the morning down on that steel deck, about 6 decks below. And then we would go have some powdered eggs, powdered potatoes, and, well, the bread and coffee, and ham. We did have ham a lot. And then we'd go up and say, not like the first time we hit, well, Palau. Now, it doesn't look like anything there, but we would, the night before, we'd be cruising, like, say, going this way, and then at night, and Palau was here. Just as soon as it got dark, we'd, and blast the throttle to get as close as we could. So, in other words, if there were Jap submarines lined up to see where we're going, and we'd turn like yay, then we could throw them off. So 9 times out of 10, we'd get over someplace before the Japs knew we were there, because they would launch us about 250 miles away, so that, and that was a deck takeoff, we'd load it down with bombs, and if the bow was down like this, you went down over the water. And I used to tell my gunner, if you see the exhaust of the engine reflecting on the water, tell me so I can pull the nose up a little bit till we got enough speed. Or if sometimes if it was too high and then you didn't have that speed, you're going to go down there over the water anyway. But and then we would rendezvous. Say there was 24 of our dive bombers and torpedo planes and that. We would rendezvous in an area which was a moving area because the carrier was going forward, and so we would rendezvous as soon as we could, and we only had red running lights, no other lights, absolutely no chatter at all on or the radio, none. Then when we get together, we'd take out on a heading towards our objective, so that when it was about 3 minutes after sunrise, we would be there. And then normally, a lot of times the F-6s, the fighters, would go in and straight the runways in the hopes of catching planes taken off, which they did. And then we would come in, and generally we had assigned targets, and it would, and always we had, if there was no shipping there, then the torpedo planes would come and drop those babies on the runway, and so that nobody could take off to come and shoot us. And then we would rendezvous and then head back to the carrier. By then, of course, there was chatter on the radio, and they'd report what they had back there. So before we got there, the second flight was all, we passed, theoretically, we'd passed them en route. And so that'd go on. Normally, if it was a real long flight, we would only fly that early morning, and then we could go and sack out for a while. But if we were close to someplace, you couldn't even go get a shower. You had to get ready. And so I might talk about a few different places. Everybody has heard about truck. Everybody, before I was even, well, in the Navy when I was a cadet, they had no idea what was there. All they knew that there was a lot of shipping. And so on that initial flight over truck, here we are. We came over the top of the mountains just after the sun had got light, and there were supposed to be 2 submarines tied up. Well, by the time we got there, I don't know how come, but these 2 subs were already burning. Whether the fighters dropped something on it or not, I don't know. Anyway, there was these huge tanks, fuel tanks, you know, about like what any place where has these big tanks. I said, well, let's go drop on these tanks, and because everybody was busy doing other things. So, and the mountains were real steep, so I said, we'll go in and then skirt alongside of that mountain. So we went, we dropped our bombs, and we just pulled out, and about then, the plane just almost like lifted in that smell, you know, and we had hit these tanks, and they just blew. I mean, and we were skirting along real close to the side of the mountain, so the small guns couldn't bear down on us. And then we got outside a truck, and then we rendezvoused, and I think there were 7 or 8 guys that got shot down, and the float plane landed and went around and picked them guys up, and that was really something. I mean, but we went in there, we had no idea what was there, and they had a lot of anti-aircraft, but I think we were there about 3 days, and we pretty well took care of it. And most of the places were like that. You'd go in, and early morning, not knowing what was there, and then by afternoon. Now, one of the interesting places was the Philippines. We came in there 2 or 3 months before old MacArthur even thought of coming back, and we went down into Davao Gulf, and I'll never forget, we were out here, and we were assigned to cross over to here from out here, and in the very middle of the Davao there, there was a tin can, a destroyer, just full blast heading on out, and a 3-plane section went over that, and they all dived, and there was a big explosion, and by the time the smoke cleared away, there was nothing but an oil slick. Now that was exciting to see. And then we moved out to Mindanao. We went in there and we blasted a lot of airfields. They then went into Manila Bay, and well, as the picture shows, there was just anything you wanted to drop. I particularly, anyway, the first time in, I dropped on a floating dry dock that the Americans had scuttled when they were leaving there, and the Japanese had repaired it, pumped it out, and brought it over, and were using it. And as I rolled over, well, there was 3 of us, as rolled over, and I looked down, and there was the destroyer inside of the floating dry dock, and then along the beach were all these guns, and for some reason, they just all bear down on the 3 of us, but we got out of it, and we sunk it. Well, it was laying on its side, let's put it that way. It probably wasn't deep enough for it to be sunk, but we sunk that baby. It rolled over, and then we came back the next day and looked for targets of opportunity. Oh, and one interesting was over at Clark Field, and there was holes in the runway and that by then, and so there was some camouflage fuel tanks, and I don't mean little ones, I mean like 10,000 gallons or something. And so I said, hey, let's hit those. Well, I just rolled over, and my gunner says, there's a 0 on our tail. And I says, well, shoot him. He says, he's too close, I can't get the gun, so I'll shoot our tail. Damn it! And so I was flying like, you know, you don't fly straight down, you'd be hanging by your belt, and you couldn't do your job. It's about like so. So I pushed that stick, and I came down like this. Well, I came down, and this 0, for some reason, he started to fly, and all of a sudden he pulled off. Well, the 0s were notorious for their wings not holding when you get into a maximum speed dive. So, but in the meantime, here comes this F6 and starts chasing them. And, well, I had to concentrate on what I was doing. But then they're telling about how this F6 chased him down along Clark Field, and he went between 2 of the hangars, and he blew up. When I get back, they were all talking about this guy that did it. Here was my roommate that had been seen the guy coming down on me, and then he peeled off and went after him, and he threw so much lead at him, they had to replace all 6 guns. So he was, but he was bound, determined he didn't want another roommate, I guess. But anyway, so he got credit for that, and which I thought was kind of a cool deal. But I also flew over that Santa Tomas prison. I don't know whether people would be familiar with it. And that was where there were government people and nurses and teachers and all that had been, the Japanese had kept them in that prison. And we flew over it, the 3 of us together, and this was the second day, and so the Japs up in the guard posts or things, whatever they are in the corner, they waved to us. So we knew things were under control. Well, the Japs never did anything to them. And we did drop some supplies there to the people there. About 3 years later, I was in a bank in Great Falls, and somebody said, well, that lady was in Santa Tomas prison when the Japs occupied it. So I went over and introduced myself, and she remembered it just to exactly how we came over and everything. So that was kind of a neat feeling. We did something decent. So anyway, that's about the way we did it. Now, there was many times, we had to go on these searches. And I remember when we were down in Mindanao, had to fly from here over here. There was supposed to be a big Japanese Marine encampment over there. So I didn't volunteer for it, but I went, and I had all these, it was just level, all these coconut trees or whatever it was, and they just stayed a few feet above them. And about halfway over there was a little airport with a DC-3. That's an old airplane. It used to be our carried passengers in the United States. Well, it was there, and they also had, of course, a tower. So we swung around and shot some 20 millimeter and 50 millimeter into the area, and then we went across. But where we were, we never found that. And then, you know, you got so much gas and you got to get back. And because when you come back, the carrier's never where they say it's going to be. I don't think it ever was. So So you always figure 20% or something, I don't know. But anyway, we flew back, and of course, yeah, the carrier was way out. See, to launch, yes.
I'm just going to ask you, are you going to get to the United in 20 minutes?
Oh yeah, I'm building up about 3 more minutes.
I got a bunch of questions for you, so you got to get there.
Okay, I'll be there. What was I talking?
The launch.
Huh?
The launch. You're starting to say something about the launch?
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 Launch.
Maybe it was last week, right?
Well, anyway, if it comes to me, I'll tell you. Yeah, launching, I might mention launching. When we'd take off, if the carrier nose was up or down, and when we were launched, we had maximum stuff that plane could carry, because they didn't want to, that's just, they said, well, he can use 89 feet to take off. Well, give him 87. And but anyway, there was, we had Gap, Ulithi, Olei. I'm trying to find out where was something was funny, but I guess it didn't get that way. We went into Guam, and well, June 11th, 12th, 15th, and 16th, and then in July. Now that was almost a month and a half before the Marines hit the beach, and there were, now the thing was that on many of these islands there were seasoned Japanese pilots. The pilots that got killed basically were on the carriers and that, but by the time we had this turkey shoot up here, well, most of them had been killed, your good Japanese, although there was guys with 20 and some like that to their credit. And Guam was the start of the end of the whole big thing. Oh, I might add, I'll tell you about Iwo Jima, and then I'll go to, okay? Iwo was, as you know, very important to the Marines, because actually there was a big strip on there, and the Army wanted to get this so that planes flying over to Tokyo could, when they come back, refuel there, or if they're shot up, try and land there. Well, anyway, the first time we hit them was in June 15th. And I had a replacement pilot. Well, he was staying with Richie and I in our room. By then we had worked our way by attrition up to where there were 3-man room. And we had put the new pilots in with the senior pilots so we could tell them what the heck is going on, what to do, how to do this and that, stuff like that. And this kid was a football player from the University of Washington. And so I said, you just fly in there close, and you stay with me, and I'll try and tell you what to do, and we'll get through. So naturally, they launched us in a real bad weather, and we got up over Iwo, and it was solid overcast. Well, like this is the island, we'd fly around it, Every so often a zero or something would come up, and the F-6s would jump on them and start blasting away. And everybody tried to stay away, because every so often they'd shoot at us, up through the clouds, with radar. And of come pretty close, but then we'd stay out just far enough we figured we were safe. Well, we were chugging along, and all of a sudden, my plane just lifts up, and I call it a cordite smell, whatever it is. And I looked, and here, this Connolly was his name, his plane just exploded. And here's all this stuff floating down and into the clouds. And nobody saw anything. They thought, I mean, he's gone. And so when the hole finally opened up enough so we'd dive. Well, of course, the Japs on Iwo would just put everything up through the hole because they knew that's where we had to come. We weren't going to dive on through a cloud. Anyway, so there's quite a bit of flak there, and but we finally got through and got back, and I reported, of course, what I thought was certainly he's gone. Well, about 3 years later, I was walking down one of the streets in the Naval Air Station at Seattle, which is now closed, I believe. And I was going down a squadron, and this guy came walking along on the other side of the street. He stopped and he says, "Hey, Rooney." I looked over and I thought, God, I don't know him. So I kept walking along, and then he said, "Hey, Rooney," and he come across the street. Well, I thought, here's the guy that's going to be embarrassed. He's going to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were so-and-so." Well, he got about from here to there, and I looked at him and says, "My God, I thought you were dead." And he says, "No, I'm still here," or something like that, you know. What had happened, as he was falling through the clouds, he was revived. He'd been knocked out, and he had his the seat and his parachute, and so he pulled his parachute and pushed the seat away, and he floated down, and he floated within about 150 yards from the beach. Well, the Japs, they went out with a motorboat and picked him up, tied him to a tree, and of course put the thing around his eyes, and all day long they'd just go along and somebody run by and bang him with, you know, in the face with their rifle butts. Well, he really didn't know anybody. He knew Richie and me and the name of the skipper. Well, they thought, man, this guy knows everything. I mean, this is their way of doing things. He knows everything. We got to get him to Tokyo. So that night they had a Zero or something on floats, a fighter on floats, and they got him in there, and they flew him over to Okinawa and then on up to Tokyo. He gets up there, and they throw him in this prison. Well, there's 4 or 5 guys from my squadron that had been picked up by the Japanese, and they don't know him. He doesn't know them. So they say, we really got a guy that knows everything. They're really sharp, but we're smarter. So they started beating on him, not feeding him, and, well, they had all his teeth knocked out. And up until the day of the end of the war, they never gave up on him. And the poor kid didn't know nothing. And so anyway, when he comes up, I didn't know what to do. And I says, well, what's the deal? And so he told me his story. And he said the Navy wants me to get out, but I said, don't do it until your face is fixed at least. So he says, I won't. And I've been in Seattle a lot, and I always try and locate him, but I haven't never been able to locate him. But anyway, there was a place, a time they called a turkey shoot, and so we were going to go to that right now, and I hope I get it in chronological order because I'll be reprimanded. And Jocko's was bad enough. Okay. We had been bombing Guam and Tinian and Saipan. Oh, on Guam, they had my claim to fame. They had they grew sugar cane, and they had one of the little engines, you know, chug, 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 that they have over there in the Hawaiian Islands, you know, to haul sugar cane around. Well, it was going up this hill to get on over to Agana town, and I saw that little bugger. So we went around and just mowed on up through the sugar cane and popped the steam out of that dude. So, but I didn't get any credit for it. But you have nice things happen once in a while. I always wanted to get a train. After all, my grandfather was a railroad man, my dad, and one of my sons, but I don't know whether that was the reason. But anyway, we were helping the Marines. One of the things that our squadron did, in which we were justly proud of, was that we helped the Marines on their landings. In other words, there'd be 2 or 3 days of battleships bombarding an island. Then a couple of days later, the cruisers would come in. And then the day before they hit the beach, the tin cans would come in. In the meantime, we're dropping bombs on it too. So we want everything pretty well shook up by the time they get there. And when the Marines would land, well, every island was set up in coordinates. Every little piece of the land was A, B, C, D, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we'd get a call from the coordinator of air ground support, and they'd say, we got a tunnel or a tunnel over here, and we need about 6 planes with napalm. Well, I like to do this because we were helping the Marines, the guys on the beach, and they had believe me, they had a rough road. Well, what we would do, we come in with these 500-pound napalm bombs, so that hit, and then they explode, and it's a liquid that just cleans this stuff and burns with a tremendous intensity. And what we tried to do always was they would call and they say coordinate 7B, in its right-hand corner there's a rock jutting out just below there. There's some gun emplacements. So we would check on our little maps that we had. We'd say, okay, we'll do it. And then I'd say, now give us a smoke. And that meant to shoot they had these Varys guns, and they'd try and shoot it to where they wanted it to go. And then they'd say it was 50 feet to the right, 50 feet to the left, and that. And then we'd go in, and we'd give a burst 20 millimeter, and then they'd say, that's on. Well, then we would make our run. We generally came in about like so, make a run, and actually like we threw it in there. And that's how we helped the Marines. We got good enough that we could once in a while put one right into a tunnel, and which we did a lot on Guam, Saipan, and certainly up on Iwo. And you got a few holes in your plane, but you knew you were doing some good. So anyway, to get back to, we were helping them guys on Guam, and one day I'd been on this deal to assist the Marines, and we'd been up there about an hour, and we got to unload our napalm on whatever coordinate, and then so we did our job. We had to go back to the carrier to get more, you know. So we were heading back. We were Guam Tinian. Let's see, I can't remember. I think we were right about in here, and that's when we got a report to stay clear of the fleet. Stay clear of the fleet. They just come out there with no code and nothing. Stay clear of the fleet. Well, here were all these Jap planes coming in, the kamikazes. The kamikazes were coming in. Well, we just stayed out here, circled, and there was a couple of big bunches of Japs, probably 100, 150 Jap planes came in, and they were all diving on the carriers, of course. Well, we couldn't go in there because, believe me, every gunner on every battleship, cruiser, and tin can was shooting at anything that was in the air. So we just stayed clear, and finally there was a lull, like X number of planes came in, the Japs had to wait, assemble some more, an hour, half an hour, or an hour or so later. So then we flew back went aboard our carriers, and of course they put us on the hangar deck because they wanted all the fighters aboard. But anyway, that was the day before we hit the Jap fleet. And of course, you're supposed to be in your ready room, and all the pilots, of course, they were out on the flight deck gawking. And I'll never forget, the island is that where all the side of the carrier, they call it the island, where all the smokestack or whatever it is. And I was standing in back of that, and one guy came over about, he might have been 40, 50 feet above, just flaming, and he missed us. And then we all talked, wow, look at that. And then went to go around to see what was coming, and another one. So we had to go back into the ready room. But anyway, we were naughty boys. And so then we knew, of course, that the Jap fleet was there because we were getting these ticker tapes down in the ready room. They would announce that there are Japs of this and that over the loudspeaker, but went down the ready room, and this ticker tape was just alive with information, and we'd sat down there. Well, then it got late in the afternoon, and I thought, well, we're not going to be launched. But then is when they said the general quarters sounded bang, 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 and everybody to the ready rooms. And we got in there, and they said, get your gear on. And I mean, we didn't sit in, believe me, like old Jocko says, we sat there all day long. We didn't do that, but we were available in a matter of minutes. But right away, they gave us this navigation. We all have our little plotting board, There's an outline of all the islands and this and that. And so we worked that real fast. And then we worked our weights, how fast we'd have to climb, and the weight of the plane, and all that. We all said, hey, man, they better we can't do this. We can't go there and get back. And then they said famous words, corrected navigation will be given you when you're airborne. Well, that's the Navy's way of saying aloha. So anyway, we got into our planes, and they launched us. And like they said, in 10 minutes, I mean, those planes were taking off, and they were wobbling. We were loaded to the gills. And but we knew we couldn't go that far. You had to climb. As you climb, you're using more gas, and you're everything. You're losing time. It's getting darker, and anyway, we just got everybody together and started heading out, and then they came this words, please, no, please. Did they say it? They said the navigational information given to you in the ready room
is the correct navigation. So right then we knew we were, so, I don't know, there's one guy, something went wrong with his plane, he hadn't been out 10 minutes, and he had to go back, he had dropped, I think it was a torpedo plane anyway. One of the guys went back and landed aboard. And of course everybody wondered, did he pull his mixture back to make that thing pop or not? But I'm sure he didn't. Anyway, we go cruising along, and everybody's kind of mad because we know we're going in to drink. But now the fighters, see, like Bill, he's mentioned Bill Dean, he had these big auxiliary tanks on the side of the fighter. He could stay up for another 4 hours. Well, and the torpedo planes could fly longer than we could. Anyway, we got up to 10 miles from where they were, and it was getting dark. And I think that some fighters had gone ahead and told us exactly where we were. Well, we kept on going, and we could just see the wake. There were some clouds, and we could just see some wakes from some ships. So we knew we were there. And so we opened up our canopies, and the gunners opened up theirs. And we went into a fast glide, and then we opened up our dive flaps a little bit, and then there all at once there the bugger was. But when you were less than 10 miles away, they wanted to save their carriers. Every gun in the Japanese task force was pointed up above the carriers, and they had different colored explosive in their shells so that the battleships would know where their fire was going, the cruisers, the carriers, and the tin cans. And so it was just all kinds of colors up there. Well, that's where we hit it. So we started down into our dive, and I just popped my flaps so I had full flaps, and a kaboom, and I got shrapnel, and I momentarily caught me because I was concentrating. I wasn't even thinking it, and I was concentrating and thought, wow, and I pulled a stick back, and then I had to realize what the heck's going on. Then the carrier was turning like this, and so you have to turn your plane like so to get lined up, and then you have to anticipate. Big carrier cannot change directions. He was going to make a circle, and so you have to in your bomb sight, and all the time my gunner is calling out the altitude because you don't have time to look at nothing. So you're looking there, and you're trimming tab to make things so the ball's in the center and everything. And when he got down to, generally he would do it in just in 1,000, like 5,000, 4,000. He got down to 4,000, 3,500, then 3,000, and then that's about the time was when I just made final deal and then release. And then everybody was rolling to the right, which is the Navy way of doing it, but I just kicked her around like so, and because I figured all that gun stuff would be falling, I kicked around so, and my plane, when it got hit, the hydraulics went out, and my Curtiss electric prop. Well, now, what happens when the Curtiss electric prop goes out is that it goes into high pitch. In other words, I was cruising along at, say, 1,850 RPM. It immediately goes to about 2,350 RPM, which means I'm just eating up gas like crazy. And then my flaps, which normally are like yay, they had come down to about so. So I was pulling and rolling, and that I thought the motor was going to, I pulled the throttle back because I thought the prop would go off. And so when you were down like that, and I went down just close to the water as I could, right in between some tin cans. And but I kept holding back, and I put trim tab in there, and to keep the nose up. And then, well, the gunners said, you got it. So I felt I'd done my duty. And and so then I went onto the heading where we were supposed to rendezvous, and you go out for 5 minutes, and then you rendezvous at 5,000 feet, and for everybody to go home. Well, it was getting dark. I turned on my damn lights, and, well, they're just a little red and green. But anyway, I didn't want anybody to run into me. Well, and anyway, I couldn't get to 5,000 feet. My plane wouldn't climb. So I was maybe 500 feet. And so then I could hear on the radio, but I tried to call and I wasn't sending. So I thought, well, I know where the carrier is, I'm heading for it. So I took the heading, and then I could see the gas just, and so I said to old Berliner, I says, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to ditch it. I says, what do you want to do? I says, well, we can bail out or put it in the drink. He says, well, what do you want to do? Well, I says, I know I'm going to land in the water. He says, that's what I want to do. And so, so we went along, and I kept watching the fuel, and I was probably only doing 120 knots max, and I knew right away I didn't have to use a little plotter to figure out I wasn't going to get back with the fuel situation. I don't know whether I had a hole in a fuel tank or not. I didn't have a fire, I know that. So anyway, we were going along, and I says, well, get your, we had a little, actually that morning we had practiced getting out of the plane in case of an emergency. We didn't do it very often, but we had done it that morning. And so I says, get that out. So he put it up in front of him. And then I said, well, I got a couple of things I got up here. And I said, be sure and tie that rope around your hand, and you have the other one ready for me. Because, you know, that you pull that CO2 bottle and that old rubber raft can get away pretty damn fast. Well, anyway, we were going along and it got perfectly dark. So I was just flying. I knew my altimeter was not correct because it had been, what, 4 or 5 hours, and the barometric pressure had changed probably 20 feet or so. So I tried to stay indicated, I think, 400 or 500 feet. So anyway, it got down to where the gas was getting pretty low. So, and I kept trying to call, and he kept trying. We could hear all this crap on the radio. Everybody was going down yelling, Mayday. So I picked up my microphone, and I says, Mayday, Mayday, but it didn't go out. Anyway, so finally, I started lowering the plane, and I said, we're going to have to ditch it in the next 10 or 15 minutes. I'll watch the fuel, and I'll make sure we got a little enough just to land with power. Because what I wanted to do, keep the wheels up, of course, and come in and make a landing and have the tail hit. There were waves, and have the tail hit before the bow, or the engine and the prop. And I said, I'll let her down, and then we'll hit there, and we'll probably go nose in and back out, and then jump out as soon as it does that on the wing. and I'll be there to get the raft. Well, and I said, now you watch so that when you see the reflection of the exhaust on the waves, I'll know exactly where I am, because I'm flying by instruments down there, and I want to keep this thing level so that we won't cartwheel or anything. So I kept lowering and lowering, and finally, yeah, there it is. I could see the reflection, and I says, okay, we're okay. And so I just kept hitting, and just as soon as I hit it, well, then I cut the engine so that the prop wouldn't make it too bad. And so we did. We went down in probably to as far as just my feet in the water, and then the plane came out and flopped flat. Well, see, there was big tanks in them wings, and that was holding it up. So he handed me the raft, and I pulled it, and then we threw our stuff into it, and we got on the trailing edge of the wing, we outside tip of the wing, we got in it and then just pushed away, and it was a matter of I don't know, to tell the truth, but I think it was 15 or 20 seconds at least before it finally sort of went like this, and then it went in. And so there we were, dark. It was dark. But it was kind of interesting too. There's a light, the algae or something on that water. It gives a funny feeling. And it looks like, my God, I can see forever. But that's kind of misleading. Excuse me for slobbering. But it is really a funny thing. Well, we took stock of what we had, and we hadn't eaten before we left, and we had some rations, but and water, but we didn't want to use it. And so then we sort of huddled in there, and we started dozing off, and I dozed off, and all of a sudden, oh, what the hell? I thought somebody had hit me with a paddle or something. And they're swordfish, and they're about yay long. You know, they go flying along about so high above the water, and boy, they hit you in the back, and you're not expecting, they just scare the hell out of you. So that was kind of scary, but then we finally realized what it was, and then we tried to say how neat it was and how exciting and that. And then we kind of, but we did agree that we didn't want the Japanese to pick us up. We thought there was definitely were Jap subs along there, and we just said nothing Japanese, because like I said, we had a feeling, I mean, we really had messed them up. So we were sleeping or dozing, and I heard the screws of a ship, and I said, "Did you hear that?" He says, "Yeah." "What do you think?" And he says, "Well, I don't know whether it's ours or the Japs." And I says, "Well, it'd be pretty hard to tell the difference." But I said, let's just see what happens. So we heard it kept getting closer and closer and closer. I said, "Well, you know, we know the battleships," because I heard that the battleships and their escort had pulled away from the carriers full blast to go up to the area where we had attacked the Jap fleet to see if there was anything laying around they could blast. So I said, this might be a battleship or a tin can. Well, we kept hearing, and then I says, "What do you say we give it a try?" Okay. So I had this little flashlight, and I turned it on, and you could hear the screws turn, and all of a sudden this light, real light, high intensity light just shined on us just for 1, 2, 3 at the most, and then it went off. And I says, well, this is it. So we sat there, and you could hear that thing as it made its turn, and then the water swishing off of the bow. And I had a Boy Scout knife in my flight suit or flight pants. I had carried it a long time, and so I got that, and then I think I had traded a Marine for a .38 and gave him my .45 or office or whatever it was, and then he had a .45. So we sat there, and this thing came around in this water. We could see it, and that's when I says, identify yourself. And then the guy says, oh, what the hell difference does it make to you? Well, then I knew we were okay. But the first thing they did, they didn't say, are you all right or anything. The guy says, tie a line on that raft. They wanted it so when they pulled into an atoll, they all had an extra raft to go over to the beach, you know. So then they threw this netting over the side, and a couple guys came down and helped us up, and turned out to be the Twining 540, and we were the first pilots that they had ever rescued. So I stayed in the captain's quarters, and it was pretty nice. And then finally they pulled up alongside of the Iowa and to refuel. And so I talked to the admiral aboard that thing and the captain, and all the time while we were taken on fuel, the guy in charge of refueling was a kid from Great Falls that I knew, and I didn't know that. And it's always bothered me that I didn't get to talk to him. But anyway, they said, do you want to come aboard the battleship? Well, I ate dinner on a battleship, and they have this linen laid out, and you got to have pressed clothes on. I says, no, if I could, I'd like to stay on the destroyer. And they said, yeah, we're going into Enowetok or somewhere, or Majuro, I don't know. And here in a few days, you just stay with them. So I said, thank you. And I stayed aboard the Tin Can, and it was really pretty nice. Yes, sir.
All right, I want to get a few questions in, if it's okay.
Sure.
Anybody have any questions?
Yes.
How long were you in the war?
Well, I don't know, because it was dark. Sunset sets in pretty fast out there. I'd say, 10, 6 hours, something, maybe more, maybe less. I don't know. Yes.
It always amazes me when pilots do a run on something and they've got TACAT coming back up at them.
Yeah.
How on earth do you keep this?
Well, the stuff comes up every second or third round is a tracer, so you know it's going by you. You have to concentrate on where you want to drop the bomb. In other words, like on a ship, in front of the bow, if it's making a right turn, a little to the right. And we probably have dropped 700 size bombs from the time we were cadets until that day. So you do it, you gotta block it out. That was just like with me. I was so mesmerized with that big carrier down there. I had dreamt of it, well, all the time I was in the Navy, of getting a chance to drop on a Japanese carrier. And so I was just so intent on that when my plane was hit, it just like took me out of how I was mesmerized, and that's why I pulled back on the stick, and so I had to kick it around to get back. But you can't think of it. You can't think of it. But when you get back, then you talk about it. Yes. Oh yeah. Yes.
Art, did you ever keep in contact with your gunner, Jack?
Jack Berliner. He went to University of Miami. He got a job with Crane, parts and that. He went down to South America, and after about 5 years, he was a head of Crane in this country in South America. And then all of a sudden, his letters stopped. All my kids have got computers. They've worked everything possible, and I just can. Now I belong to the Hornet Club, which incidentally is going to meet in September in Washington, D.C. for our 50th get-together. And our main speaker is former President Bush, and then a couple admirals that we knew. And one of my roommates, 6 years after he was a lowly pilot on there, ended up as the skipper of the Hornet, which is almost unbelievable. He was not Academy man, and if we took 12 guys out of the squadron, he'd have been 13 if I would have picked him. Honest to God, he's a nice guy. Yes?
Did you drop a bomb on that carrier?
Oh, yeah, that's what we did.
Did you sink it?
Oh, well, all I know is they say it was sunk later. It was burning. Oh yeah, it was burning.
Do you know which one it was?
Well, I thought it was a Shikaku. That's what I reported. That's what it looked like to me. Yes.
When you were first going in as a cadet and everything else, they were split up into different squadrons, different types of aircraft.
Yeah.
How did they decide what aircraft you were to get into and that sort of thing?
Well, that's a sore spot. We're down at Pensacola, and Barron Field was a fighter field, and that's where my roommate and I, and Robbie, the guy that ended up as the skipper, we all signed up for Barron. And we ended up going to, I forget the name of it, to the dive bomber squadron because they did not have room for us. And they says, you'll get to go there after you've been through. Well, that's a bunch of garbage. Navy didn't do that. No, we were definitely going to be fighters. Yes?
Art, I noticed that you earned the Distinguished Flying Cross. What mission, or was there one?
Well, that was for hitting the carrier. Yeah.
For hitting the carrier, though?
Yeah. I think I got one for the destroyer in the dye dock too, if I'm not mistaken, because that was kind of exciting. Yes?
You mentioned you were winged for another flyer. What exactly does the wingman do for the other guy?
Well, in the fighters, you never go anywhere without your wingman to protect your tail. In other words, the senior guy goes first, and then this guy protects his tail and tells him what's coming up. And then as you graduate, he gets attrition than somebody else. And in the dive bombers, we flew in 3 plane sections, 3, 3, then 3, 3, in 3 plane sections, so that nobody just dove just by themselves. There was always 3 planes, and you stayed together, see. And not only that, when you pull into tight formation, you've got 6 50 millimeters in case somebody's going to make a run on you. And it just seems to work out good for that. The torpedo planes, I think, were 3 planes as well. Yeah. Yes?
When you did your dive bomb run, what altitude did you start out at? What kind of, would you do about a 60 to 70 degree dive? And then what altitude did you normally pull out?
If we're diving on something on the sea, well, then we would go down to pretty close to 2,000 feet and then pull out. But the thing is, if you were 1,000 feet, land at 1,000, then you'd pull out higher. But we'd come in, we'd be chugging along maybe at 150, 60 knots until we got to within 10 miles of our object, and then we'd push the nose over to gather speed, so that when we came over the target, normally we were doing over 200 knots, but then you pop your flaps and your plane just comes to slows down. Now, you don't fly, when you dive bomb, you don't fly like straight down. You'd be, you know, your shoulder straps would be holding you there. You're actually, I'd say, about 85 to 90 degrees, so that you can adjust your trim tab, you know, to make the plane fly. You can't be in a skid or it'd throw the bomb way over the side. Needle ball airspeed, and you just keep that glide. As you get closer, you might pull it in a little tighter, but it gives you some degree of variance. Also, if you're diving and the wind also has an effect on you, you got to take that into consideration all the time. And but yeah, now pulling out is could be a scary thing, but now my gunner always called so at 2,500 you should be ready to do what you're supposed to do, and so when you hit 2,000 you can do it. And I always just pulled back as hard as I could. I'd hit the flaps and start pulling out as hard as I could, and a lot of the guys in the squadron did it. And then I'd look at the, you know, the instrument panels here and then the cowling here. I would look at the cowling, and if you know, the G's are pulling you down, and I kept watching that, and if it started to gray out, then I'd ease up, because you gray out before you black out, and if you black out, it takes you a long time, to quite a while, to come back. But if you gray out, just ease up on the stick a little bit, and if there's still space, well, then you could do that. I used to like to come out as close to the ground as I could, or the water, or whatever, because there's a lot of guys with BB guns shooting at you, you know, and if you're close to the ground, well, they can bring it down to bear on you, or they'll be shooting across at some of their own people. So a lot of the guys would pull out, and when they started to gray out, well, then you would ease the stick, and then it doesn't last long, but it's in that whatever that is, in that area right in there. So no, I think the guys that got killed in dives, unless they were hit, would black out. They got too excited or whatever, and do that. But I would always hit my flaps so that I could pick up that extra speed to get out of there. But I'd also try and keep the nose down a little bit so that I would maintain that speed. Yes, sir.
Did the Navy have a way of rotating pilots, or did they just, as long as you were doing the job, you stayed with that aircraft?
Well, the more experience they got, the more they wanted you out there. Our air group was out there for, well, I think there's one air group that took part in the Battle of the Midway, either 2 or 10, I'm not sure which, was out longer than we were, but we were in more quote engagements than any other air group, and we knew all about the damn Jap fleet out there, and we were saying, when are we going to get to go home? Why don't you get a new air group in here so they'll be gung-ho to go there? You know, we were getting gun-shy. But they says, oh no, you got experience. We got to keep you. You guys can't go home. So as soon as you hit the Jap fleet, then you can go home. So we were looking forward to getting it. And then, then we could, we knew we were going to get to go home. So,
Any other questions?
any more sea stories?
No questions? Let's give Art a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you. You did good. You did
Thank you.
good. Very nice.